So this video is how we clean the C strainer on the Richard E. Bird. The Bird has two C suctions, a high for when we're in port and we don't want to suck up any trash or sand or silt from the bottom, and then the low C suction is used when we are at sea and we want to prevent the intake of air as much as we can as the ship rolls back and forth. There are vents that release it, but it's best just to be efficient and not have as much air as we can. Each strainer has a differential pressure gauge, which lets us know how fouled the strainer is. The red line on the right-hand side shows the crucial differential pressure of around 7 psi, but the engineers usually clean the strainers around 3 psi differential pressure. It's very important to ensure that the online sea strainer is at a safe differential before starting to clean the other one. If both strainers were to be fouled at the same time and inoperable, the plant wouldn't have any means of cooling. So the next step is to close off the intake and discharge sides of the strainer. The intake is a motor-operated valve, or MOV, so that one was closed remotely. After verifying that the valve was closed, it was placed in hand, meaning that we had it locally controlled and we locked it out. The outlet side was unfortunately not an MOV, so that one had to be cranked closed manually, which took a long time. So there I am, closing down the outlet side of the strainer. So there we are. Once the valve is finally closed, we make sure it is all the way shut and nice and tight. After the strainer was secured, we checked the vent at the top of the strainer, seen here on the right, to make sure that no pressure was trapped and that the valves are not leaking by. So we opened up the vent valve, and there at the bottom you can see we were waiting for all flow to stop, and once it did, we knew that the strainer was secure and there was no pressure built up inside the strainer, and it wasn't going to burst open when we loosen the bolts or remove the top. So after that, you can see me and Alex removing the vent line, and we also removed the RTD connection using a pipe wrench and a forward wrench just to get it out of our way. Once everything was clear from the strainer, we began loosening the bolts using a pneumatic impact gun and a 41mm socket that is used just for the sea strainers. It had a 3/4 inch drive on it, so it is a pretty big impact gun. In the video, you can see third engineer Jake and second engineer Lorenzo working with Alex and Karsten to remove the nuts. They just kind of work to cinch the top on there, but they didn't have to come all the way off, which was easier, so we didn't have to keep track of all the nuts. So we then used a 1/4 ton chain fall to lift the lid slowly. The lid was secured to the railing so it would be out of the way while we cleaned the strainer. But this video is in 2 times speed and it still took a long time to lift the lid off the strainer. It was very heavy. So there's Jake working on the chain fall there. So once we got the lid a little closer, we used some habit strap to secure it to the railing, and the guys just kind of lifted it up and held it while we tied it off. There's Alex tying it off and making sure it was secure so we could work. So you can't see it in this video, but there is a large O-ring gasket for the lid on the strainer, so we pulled that, we inspected it, cleaned it, and then we set it aside to be replaced later. We then pulled the strainer with the chain fall and slid some boards underneath to hold it. We have a third strainer on hand that can quickly replace the old one if we're in a rush, but for this we just lifted the strainer up and hoisted it above while we placed some boards underneath, and then we got to work cleaning it. So once we had the strainer up on the board, we let the tension out of the chain fall. We just used a pressure washer and some wire brushes to clean the outside and then the inside. It wasn't terribly fouled up, only with a differential pressure of about 2 psi, but we still had to scoop out all the seaweed and the rotting fish, which smelled absolutely wonderful. There's Karsten scooping it out, and they're using the pressure washer to clean the fins on the strainer there. Once it was all clean, we rehoisted it by the chain fall, pulled the boards out, and then we carefully slid the strainer back in place, making sure it was facing the right way. We applied some silicone lubricant to the clean O-ring, and we cleaned out the groove on the casing of the strainer, and we replaced the O-ring, making sure it would fit nicely and it was all secure. We lowered the lid back on and fastened the bolts using the impact gun at first, but then we tightened them with breaker bars to ensure they were nice and tight. The next step was to reattach the thermometer and the vent valve in line. With the outlet still closed, we carefully cracked the inlet to the strainer to refill it with water. Once water began to flow out of the vent, we slowly realigned the outlet and secured the vent. That way we knew that there was no water trapped in that was going to get sucked into the line. It was just water. Then we carefully opened the inlet all the way and the outlet valve open all the way, and then we placed the inlet MOV back into remote and removed the locks. Then we just cleaned up the area, replaced all the tools into the shop, and that is how you clean a sea strainer.